you, Madam Speaker. I'll be sharing my time today with the member from Saskatoon University. I'd like to thank Madam Speaker for this opportunity to rise again and speak to this government's disastrous bill, Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, that would regulate the internet and stymie free expression. It's ironic that this government claims to be modernizing the Canadian Broadcasting Act by creating a flexible, fair, and modern approach, when in fact, the bill will punish Canadian digital creators and move Canada's cultural, creative, and media industries backwards. It's disheartening to see how the criticisms and the calls for reform coming from the internet media experts, former CRTC commissioners, and from Canadian artist creators themselves are all being ignored. Bill C-11 is an example of what happens to government that has been in power for far too long. They have forgotten who they serve, and frankly, they have grown fat on entitlement and hubris. It is a bill that gives unacceptable and inappropriate permission to this government and in any future government to control Canadians and use the internet and control the Canadians' use of the internet, both with what they choose in their content and what they watch and listen to, and even how to express themselves freely online in a public square. The greater danger of Bill C-11 is that it opens the door to an increasing government manipulation of technology and algorithms for the purpose of social control. And why? Why would any government want to limit the expression in a strong, free, and democratic society such as Canada? They want to do this simply for power and to seek control. Any government can give into the temptation of overstepping their authority when they are left in power for far too long, when there are too few checks and balances in place, and when institutional legacy media begins to do the bidding of the governing party. The system breaks down and the doors for the thought police open. And when that happens, all of our freedoms and liberties that we take for granted in this precious country will slowly disappear. Even those freedoms in our own homes. Yes, in our own homes. Government, if given the chance and the opportunity, will trespass into telling us what we can watch even in our own homes by using algorithms that will determine the content that we see online and the narratives that we hear. This is what we must guard against. Clause 7 of Bill C-11 specifically gives permission to Cabinet to direct the CRTC with regard to this legislation. The bill requires that online platforms prioritize Canadian content over non-Canadian content. It grants the CRTC the ability to require platforms such as YouTube and Facebook to change and manipulate algorithms and search engines to meet the government directives. What does this mean? It means this bill gives the government control over what Canadians see, what they post, and what they watch online. Bill C-11 will also give Ottawa bureaucrats the power to regulate any content that generates revenue directly or indirectly, which could apply to most user content online. The government had a chance to accept the Senate's amendments to this narrow scope and protect Canadian content, but they failed to do that. They failed to do the right thing, and they voted against the Conservative amendments. Why? I would argue that it's because this government does not trust Canadians with their own thoughts and with their own freedoms. In fact, trying to expand their control to Canadians online, even in their privacy of their own homes. Jeanette Patel, the head of Canada's Government Affairs of Public Policy at YouTube, explained this. Quote, C-11 explicitly gives a government regulator authority over what content is prioritized and how and where content is presented to Canadians, handing the CRTC the power to decide who wins and who loses, end quote. Timothy Denton, who's a former CRTC commissioner, president, and the president of the Internet Society of Canada, said this about C-11. Quote, C-11 makes user-generated videos and podcasts, virtually anything involving sound and video, subject to CRTC regulation. Indeed, it is a wonder that government stopped there. Why not regulate email as well? Nor does the regulation of speech stop at Canada's borders. Bill C-11 permits the CRTC to exercise global authority over programs in any language of any source, end quote. He goes on to say this, that the CRTC is all about control. Who gets to speak, within what limits, how often, and what effect. Usually the control is exercised indirectly, but in this case, it was overt, end quote. Bill C-11 empowers government-dictated algorithms to decide what you can see and which videos and sources are Canadian enough to see. Conspicuously, there is no definition of what is classified as Canadian content in this bill that focuses on Canadian content. Moreover, the current definition used by the CRTC is so antiquated and so narrow that it eliminates production like The Canadian Story, The Handmaid's Tale being filmed in Canada with Canadian actors and Canadian producers, or Netflix's major francophone film, Jusqu'au déclin, which was made and written in Quebec. Madam Speaker, I would argue that this bill is a form of censorship, that it is more insidious than a government-issued order or mandate or sanction, because in this case, Canadians will not know what they are being censored for. If this bill passes, bureaucrats behind closed doors, subject to the will of their political masters, will issue directives to manipulate algorithms and control the search bar in your home. They will never know, Canadians will never know what is not being allowed. In this scenario, the government can control what is presented to you and what is put in your very mind by controlling what you see. Canadian creators will not know the reason why their content is not going viral. Creators will never know when their content is being demoted by government-dictated algorithms. Madam Speaker, this is a form of technocratic control, and I fear, as many Canadians do, that this technocratic control will grow as our society becomes more digitally dependent on artificial intelligence and internet-connected smart technologies. As parliamentarians, it is our duty and our responsibility to serve the interest of Canadians and uphold the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. This bill is an attack on freedom of choice and freedom of expression of all Canadians online. We must not allow this government to creep down a path that leads to silencing critics from promoting some voices over others that politically suit their ends. Madam Speaker, in closing, I want to say that creativity blossoms in a culture of freedom and control, and not control. We need to go back to the days when government served the people. As we consider this bill, I urge all parliamentarians in this House to remember our great foundations of freedom upon which this country was built, the freedom to think, the freedom to speak, and the freedom to live without government interference.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want you and others to understand and have an appreciation of the contrast.
Drop the Honourable Member. We are in a period of questions and comments. Can the Honourable Member listen to the questions being asked, please? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I want to talk about contrast. If we want to use the word attack, put it in the perspective of how the Conservative Party has made it very clear through this member's speech and the Leader of the Conservative Party's speech that this is an attack on Canadian content. This is an attack on CRTC. We now have the Leader of the Conservative Party with another policy platform, and that is to diminish the role of CRTC here in Canada. As he and his other colleagues clap, Madam Speaker, Canadians and people that are in the arts and industry, culture, that industry is so valuable to Canada, and the Conservatives are throwing it up in the air saying, we don't care. The Liberals and government cares about that community, and my question to the member is, why has the Conservative Party given up on Canada's heritage and those that promote it through arts and performance?
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
I thank the Honourable Member for his question. In fact, we have not given up. We are the warriors that are fighting to preserve this heritage, because we know that this heritage can only be preserved if we have freedom of expression. And we have to ensure that governments cannot dictate what Canadians see, what they think, what they hear online. That is not the role of government. The role of government is to stay out of the lives of Canadians and let freedom reign.
Absolutely.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wonder if I can clarify from the member for Haldimand Norfolk's speech. My understanding is that C-11 already passed in this House back in June. I understand she didn't support that then, and it's clear she doesn't support that now. Tonight we're debating the message being sent back to the Senate with respect to the amendments that the Senate proposed, some of which the governing party disagreed with. Would you like to comment on that which we're voting on this evening? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
I think it's a travesty that the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc did not support the amendments of the Senate, specifically in excluding creator content. That would have done a lot to protecting Canadian creators, and it's a travesty that the Senate put so much work into that and that this House partially rejected. I'm proud to say that the Conservatives stood with the Senate proposals.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her excellent speech. And, you know, I found it really fascinating that the Senate, which is filled with a lot of the Prime Minister's supposedly independent senators, even they were upset about this bill and they were pushing back. So I'm just wondering if the member has any thoughts about what the Senate was trying to do and how they are actually standing up for the rights and freedoms of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
I think that it's clear that this is one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation that is ever passed in this nation. And I think that the Senate sees the danger in this legislation, the danger to encroach upon the freedoms of Canadians. And I think, as a sober second thought, that these amendments should have been taken more seriously by this House, because the Senate spent a great deal of time as the House of sober second thought to craft these amendments to make sure that Canadians' liberty and freedom are protected in the online forum. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret.
I think it's ironic that the members opposite don't understand that they're censoring the censorship bill. In second reading, the government and their costly coalition partners, the NDP, imposed closure. Then they used the coalition in the House to impose a rule on the committee study of the bill, which didn't allow for the amendments being proposed to even be read in the committee before committee members voted on them, another form of censorship and closure. And then again, now, today, they're putting closure on the Senate amendments. So I'd like the member to comment on the fact that on a bill that restricts freedom of what people can do on the internet, why would we expect anything other than this government to censor it all along the debate?
Very brief answer from the honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
It is very sad because with the interest that this bill has generated amongst grassroots, average, everyday Canadians, it is very sad that the Liberals did not take this at heart and actually sought for closure. We should have had prolonged debate on this bill so that Canadians and the Liberals could convince Canadians that they were in fact not taking a...
Resuming debate.